traditions, there were a huge range of literatures in these particular places, and therefore English, when it comes into contact with these particular languages, produces a variety. It influences others, but also gets influenced. English borrows a lot of words from many of the languages with which it came into contact. One reason why English has acquired a particular dominance is its readiness to absorb new words, readiness to take new words and incorporate that into the language, into the structure, into the grammar, and the vocabulary keeps growing, and therefore the language also keeps growing. So you'll find that the English in these particular areas, in the expanding in the outer circle, has this key quality that it borrows a lot of words. But borrowing itself is not enough. That's the point that I will come back to again. What makes a language acceptable? What makes it a variety? What makes a usage variety? Is it enough if you just use the word in particular domains? Is it enough if you are only writing essays for examination purposes? But when can we say that that can be a Luton variety of English? Or when can we say that there is a Nigerian or a particular variety of English? So the key to that is that any variety that aspires to become a variety has to be interiorized, has to be a part of the emotional setup, emotional longing, emotional expression of the people who use it. So you find that the distinguishing feature of the outer circle is the use of language in literature. So you have writers who start using English, who start they become wordsmiths, they experiment with language, they come up with something, and at one stage they would be worried whether they would be penalized like this student in Botswana. But at one stage, they break out of this particular confinement. They break out and come out as somebody who wants to express in their own words, in their own environment, to their own audience initially. But this is not specific to, this is the point where it's not very specific to the outer circle, it's also specific to the inner circle. American English was not accepted very easily. American literature was not accepted that easily. So when writers such as Walt Whitman and Edgar Allan Poe wrote, they always were trying, emphasizing time and again that American literature should be independent. America should have a literature of its own, not a limitation of Britain. So this quest for a variety, the quest for intellectual and emotional release through a particular variety of language is central, whether it was in the United States or Nigeria or India or elsewhere. So we'll go back to this, why the outer circle and the expanding circle are slightly different. Now, I'm not trying to say that the outer circle, the people in the expanding circle are any less emotional or any less interesting or any less intellectually capable to the people in the other circles. But certainly they use in particular domains, and it is because the use of the language is limited in particular domains, in particular areas of life, so to speak. And that is why we find that in the expanding circle, the number of domains or the importance of those particular domains or areas is less. And that's why we find in China, Russia, Brazil, English is learned very often. English is a foreign language. And if you want to map onto some of these categories of English that people use, so you can say in this inner circle, it is English as first language, broadly. And second one, you could say English as a second language. And in the third one, you could say English as a foreign language. You might be coming across these particular divisions, ESL, EFL, and different categories. And they easily map onto some of these divisions. So that's one reason why the simplicity makes it easy for people to map on the categories, map on the nationalities or national boundaries, and therefore this particular model has been very useful. Now I don't want to limit ourselves to this particular model, but we'll keep that, we'll keep this as a standard reference point. But I want to move on to the next area of looking at these others, so to speak. I try to, as you can say, do other Englishes exist? That's what I want to go to. When we use the word other, very often this is a very philosophical argument. Who is the other? Other is usually the person who I am not, or we are not. So in other words, the notion of other falls into the sort of philosophical divisions of good and bad, or good and evil, and which goes back to what one might call theoretically, at least to pre-Christian philosophers from Persia or Iran, where a philosopher by name Mani tried to say that that there's a God which is the evil and then there is good. This sort of dichotomy between A versus B. So you are with me or against me. You are a friend or foe. So these are some things which you come across, whether you are identifying yourself in the military or outside. But philosophically, this goes back to the notion that there is an essential difference between good and evil, so to speak. But often what happens is that we assume that we are good and the other person is not good, unless we are very generous and admit to a lot of things. So culturally, groups, the standardized central variety thinks that that is the correct thing, and the others are not. This is not very specific to English. This happens in every language. The center assumes that it is the correct one. You take Sanskrit, for example. Sanskrit is actually a refinement. The word Sanskrit means refinement, a refined variety. It's not the language of the common people. It's the refined one. It's something special. And therefore, when Panini writes his grammar, it is about this particular variety, not about the varieties which were the common people, but then people who used those particular varieties were important for somebody else who wanted to spread a religion or something like that. So the key point I'm coming back again is that every variety of every language takes a particular central core and treats that as the most important thing, and anything outside that is not important. And that particular thing becomes the other. Center, periphery, me, him, or other, so to speak. So in this particular dichotomy that exists philosophically between the center and the other, we find some of these particular varieties, some of these attitudes in Dante's. But it is not always that this particular other is from the center, but it could also be the opposite of it. It could also be the opposite of what is negated. When Jean-Paul Sartre wrote in defense of negritude, the movement of black is beautiful, starting in Senegal and other West African countries, he used the expression that it is a negative negation of a negative value system. So he was not afraid to support the idea that black is beautiful, essentially meaning that black can also be beautiful, not as what it is often said it's not in the colonial hierarchy of a particular time. So now what I'm trying to do here is that this categorization of other, me and the other, can work both ways. So when a variety is marginalized, the users of a particular variety which can be marginalized can feel that that particular variety is theirs. That gives a solidarity, that gives a sense of identity, and that particular identity is very crucial in sustaining these varieties. So you would find people defending Indian English, defending very passionately Nigerian English is as good as any other English. So the idea of the other Englishes, I'm trying to use the word other not only in a more traditional sense in which other is the one which is powerless, but in this particular case, other in terms of identity, in terms of affirmation, in terms of identification with what that particular variety means. So a variety exists partly because of this particular identification and that particular identification can be based on power, which then means it is taught in schools, it's taught in universities, it's taught in places where you go to the interview and you get the job. But you won't get a job, say for example, you go and, unless it is a specialist job, you go and use a regional variety. You expect the person to be using RP as much as possible. It's a language of the center. So you find that this particular area, but at the same time, you can also find situations where people who, if you talk RP, you are out of the group. Oh, you know, he's posh, he's not with us, he's not with us, he's not one of us. So the group identity, which comes from the use of a particular language, creates this particular basis for othering, and that particular othering is central to the variety formation, and that particular variety formation here is the categories here. Now let's look at a little bit more closely on what aspects of language convey this particular otherness, and how this particular otherness is very important. One obvious way, it's better to approach this by using the idea of, say, 4 aspects of communication in a language, say, speaking, reading, writing, listening. So speaking and listening, let's put them together. Speaking and listening, writing and reading. So if a variety has to be formed, if a Nigerian variety of English has to be seen as existing, it has to somehow fit into all these 4 areas. Maybe not necessarily equally, but certainly in areas where it would feel that that all the 4 are catered for. Now, for example, let's take, for example, speaking. You could very well look at pronunciation. You could very well look at some particular aspects of pronunciation, which are specific to a region or specific to a language user. And again, it is very important. One of the key things I want to again stress is that although I'm talking about English as one language, we should also remember that no language exists in isolation. Languages exist at the same time in some ways as multi-variety or multilingual varieties. So in other words, a linguistic capability of a human being can accommodate more than one narrow defined category of language. Whether somebody can move between a regional variety and to a central variety, from Cockney to RP, or from Glaswegian language to a language used in Luton. So human mind is not limited to a very category. Where it gets limited is what is accepted and what is accepted by things what you want to do and why you have to do in a particular way to be accepted. To be accepted as for a job, it has to be like this, so to speak. But let's go back to this. What makes Nigerian English a special category? Or what makes English used in Russia not in that particular category? So if you can look at both sides, then you probably understand the process a bit more. So it could be in terms of pronunciation. So certain vowels, certain consonants, the way they travel across areas. So when English moved from England to Caribbean and Caribbean to America and so on, so there's a certain movement. Some vowels, some aspects are dropped off, some aspects change. Even English itself emerges because of the great movement in the way the language spoken in England and France differs, and therefore that sets English apart as a major category in itself, the great shift as it is called. So first thing is for us to identify and see in what areas is the language that we are speaking different from what one might call the center or the other. So that might make us more comfortable with what we're using. So then let us look at the written part of the language. Written part of the language is again very important because written part is what provides the standard. English got standardized when the printing machine was invented. It contributed to a great extent. So previously when people used to